Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Sporty's webinar. We're glad you could join us today for flight simulators, tools or toys for pilots. Flight simulators, certainly a very, very hot topic in aviation right now with all the advancements in software and hardware. A lot of things to keep up with, a lot of traps also you want to avoid as well. So we are thrilled to have you with us for a look at this important topic. My name is John Zimmerman. I'm with Sporty's Pilot Shop. I will be your facilitator today, and your presenter today is Chris McGonegle. Chris is an active pilot, has a commercial pilot's license and an instrument rating, so he knows aviation from the real airplane side, if you will, but he also heads up our flight simulator department at Sporty, so he is knee-deep in the simulator world every day and knows this system well. So just a couple of quick housekeeping announcements before I turn it over to Chris. First, this webinar will be recorded, so if you have to step away or if you missed something, check out our YouTube channel in just a couple of days and you'll be able to get a video recording of this webinar. Also, we will be answering questions. So in the GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see a box there where you can ask questions. Feel free to type those at any time. We'll answer as many as we can. And if we have some time left over at the end, Chris will answer some of the more popular questions live so we can discuss those. So with that, Chris, take it away.
Thank you, John. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris McGonegle, and today we are going to discuss how a flight simulator can sharpen our flying skills. We're going to cover what hardware and software options we have at our disposal with a dedicated focus on the new Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 program. As John mentioned, I'm the product manager here at Sporty's Pilot Shop and also a graduate of the University of Cincinnati's Aviation Academy. I've spent hundreds of hours in a Cessna 172, so I like to think I have a pretty solid grasp on the realism and abilities a simulator can offer to the aviation community. So today we're going to cover three main topics. We'll take a brief walk down memory lane to better understand how flight simulators have progressed over the last 80 years. We're going to cover what is needed for an at-home flight simulator with the subcategories of hardware and software options. And then lastly, we'll discuss what you can do with the simulator once it's ready to go fly. So let's start at the beginning. The first flight simulator was the Link, predominantly used in World War II. The Link trainer allegedly evolved from organ and player piano technology, and it was the bane of fighter pilots training. It was rumored that most pilots would prefer flying actual combat missions rather than logging a training lesson in the Link. As you can see, it's a pretty elementary simulator right there in front of us. As airlines recognize the cost advantage to supplementing training and educating newer pilots to their SOPs, they started to invest in the benefits simulators can offer. Here's a picture from flight safety from roughly the 1970s. It wasn't until about the late 70s when a flight simulator started to move towards the individual consumer market rather than the big businesses or trainers. It was 1979 to be exact when FS1 Flight Simulator from Sublogic was released, and the cornerstone for the programs we enjoy today was laid. It was 42 years ago, and you could get some terrain, airspeed and altitude indications on a purple dial, an indicated turn rate, heading, vertical velocity, or VSI, and a few engine indicators. It's fair to say we have come a very long way. Now, as these programs progressed, we started to see not only more colors enter the screens, we also started to get additional aircraft options, some more vivid dials and indicators, realistic airport indications, more customizable features, and eventually the very vivid simulator we have today. And as you can see from the progression from 84 up until today, we've made leaps and bounds. We now have the ability to go well beyond the panel 6-pack in a few colors and even exceed what flight safety was able to offer early on. This is the cockpit of an Avro Vulcan looking like it's ready to run a bombing mission. After further review, you may pick up that it is a simulator, and it's actually a home-built flight simulator designed and constructed by one of our customers here at Sporty's. Now, today's webinar, we are not going to cover how to design and build this state-of-the-art home simulator, but we are going to cover what minimum hardware is required to build an effective flight simulator for your home. So let's get into what is needed for a flight simulator. The first part is a computer with a monitor to run the program. Next, we're going to need flight control hardware. And lastly, we'll need to decide which program or software we would like for our flight simulator. So let's say we're starting fresh and purchasing a computer solely for a simulator. It's not going to be for photos, it's not going to be for music, for videos, it is just for a simulator. In that case, the recommended specifications are a 64-bit processor and operating system, Windows 10 or Mac OS X 10.11 or newer, 3.5 gigahertz or faster processor, 16 gigabytes RAM memory, a video card with at least 4 gigs of video RAM, internet connection, and lastly, 64 gigabytes of available storage space. Now keep in mind these specs are entry level when discussing flight simulators. The numbers above won't allow you to run some of the more power hungry programs out there, but these numbers will allow you to dip your toe into the pond. Comparable models from big box stores hit all these requirements and start around $500. I like to think of these pieces as the organs of our system. Now, if you want to avoid the challenge of building a PC piece by piece, then a quick search of gaming PCs will yield some competitive options and configurations. In partnership with another Cincinnati-based company, we at Sporty's are proud to give our stamp of approval on a gaming PC that will handle any simulation program thrown at it on high settings. The Deluxe Flight Simulator computer offers an AMD Ryzen 7 3800X processor, a Pro WX7100 8 gigabyte video RAM graphics card, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and a 32-inch monitor. Now, if those numbers or descriptions flew right over your head like they initially did mine, we have a great article on sportys.com/blog titled Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, What Pilots Need to Know, where we really dive into the weeds of what those components do and why they're important. Okay, so we're going to cover the majority of flight simulation hardware by focusing on 5 categories. We're going to focus on yokes, flight sticks, throttles, rudder pedals, an often overlooked category, if I may say, and lastly, the remaining catch-all, flight deck complements. In keeping up with the anatomy analogies, I think of the flight control hardware as the muscle and nervous system of our flight simulator. Starting off with flight control hardware, we have 2 of the most popular flight simulation pieces we offer here at Sporty's. The Logitech Flight Simulator Yoke with Throttle is our most popular piece by volume, and rightfully so. It offers ample features, including a timer and clock on the front face of the yoke, multiple customizable buttons on top of each yoke handle, and a large underside clamp to keep the yoke from sliding around on a table or desk. The Logitech yoke includes a 3-lever throttle body that can be configured either on the left or right side of the yoke. The lever heads, as you see on the image, that little black, blue, and red pieces, we are able to take those off, and if you had a second throttle lever body next to it, you could then configure this for multi-engine operations. So you could have 2 throttle, 2 propeller, and 2 mixtures. It's a great frugal way to offer multi-engine simulation. The next yoke on the right we'll focus on is Sporty's most popular yoke based off of ratings, and that's the Honeycomb Alpha Flight Simulator yoke. Here we are 2 years after its debut, and we still have trouble keeping this yoke in stock, and that's reasonably so. The Honeycomb yoke has a very realistic travel due to using ball bearings in the internals along with a cord design rather than the bands. It also has a master switch, avionics switch, and 5-position magneto switches to help with cold starts or mag checks during run-up. The Honeycomb Alpha is a great yoke and one that I personally log a lot of time with. The final yoke we're going to talk about today is the Redbird Alloy Flight Simulator yoke. The Alloy yoke is the most robust yoke on the consumer market by far. The very first thing I noticed about this yoke as I took it out of the box is its weight. It's designed to high standards and is used on Redbird's certified training devices, so you know that you're getting a serious machine with the alloy. This yoke retails for about $800 and really moves a flight simulator from a hobby or enthusiast level to a trainer or for a full tool. Transitioning into flight sticks. We're going to begin with the Logitech Flight Sim joystick. This is my first recommendation when someone asks me, what's a good way to start with price being their main driver towards buying a piece? The Logitech stick takes care of pitch and roll, moving the stick forward or aft and side to side. But what most don't expect is you can also handle yaw by twisting the stick clockwise or counterclockwise. There's also a small lever at the base of the stick to allow throttle control, and additionally 12 programmable buttons plus an 8-way hat switch. It's a very potent piece and the ideal starter option. For the more specific simmers, we offer the Thrustmaster side stick in the Airbus edition. This stick is a 1-to-1 ratio of what you'll find in Airbus 320, and the black and red buttons on top can be interchanged, so you could simulate either captain or first officer orientation. It includes 16 action buttons and a hat switch also. It includes Thrustmaster's Hall Effect Accurate technology, or HART, which uses magnetic sensors to increase precision and accuracy while reducing wear and tear. It's a great piece and the preferred option for left-hand dominant simmers. The Thrustmaster HOTAS 1 is a very impressive piece compared to its price. It incorporates a stick and a breakaway throttle to allow engine management and secondary flight control personalization. Let's say you want to simulate flying a Cirrus SR-22. You can move the stick to the left side of the simulator and the throttle body to the right, and you're in a more realistic layout. The term HOTAS is actually an acronym for hands-on throttle and stick, which is popular in the VR community because it offers a lot of buttons in a small space. Therefore, when you have a VR headset over your eyes, you don't need to remove your hands from their resting places to depress other buttons. Everything is within reach. The Thrustmaster HOTAS includes 15 configurable buttons, a 2-way rocker on the back side of the throttle lever, typically configured for rudder trim, and an 8-way hat switch. Last, but certainly not least worth highlighting, is the HOTAS 1 is compatible with Xbox and the frontrunner for customers using Microsoft Flight Simulator on the Xbox platform. Logitech also offers HOTAS-styled sticks for their customers. Here we have the X52 flight stick with throttle lever and screen. The LCD display provides real-time information about your button configuration for ease of flight. Between the buttons, 2-way rockers, hat switches, rotating dials, and sliders, there are a total of 105 programmable commands that the X52 can convey to a flight simulator program. You may get to the point where you don't have any additional commands to assign to these buttons. On the right side of our screen, we have the Logitech X56, which builds on the 52 design with the shift towards a more metal design rather than the 52's plastic design. Another glaring difference is the option to have 1 or 2 throttle levers for your digital flying. With the removal of a small latch, the 2 levers can move independently of each other. The 56 also has 7 2-way metal switches, very similar to what you'd find on a lot of aircraft these days. As mentioned, the 52 offered 105 programmable commands. The Logitech X56 increases that number to 189. It is not a flight stick I would recommend for someone who's new to the flight sim community, but both the X52 and 56 have separate bases for the stick and the throttle and can easily be configured for left or right seat flying. And then closing out flight sticks, we have the Noble Flight Simulation Cirrus side stick for all those Cirrus drivers out there. The Flight Sim yoke feels and reacts like it was pulled right out of an SR-22. You'll see the 45-degree resting angle and travel of roll inputs in addition to pitch has Sporty's in-house Cirrus pilot stating, quote, "This is 95% accurate to what I feel in my airplane," end quote. Included mounting hardware and programming make sure that this yoke will meet or exceed your expectations for a Cirrus-styled flight simulator piece. Throttle quadrants. These are a must when it comes to assembling a flight simulator. As one who has tried trust me, it's not worth trying to use a mouse roller as a throttle control. The SATEC throttle quadrant offers a throttle mixture and prop lever with location markings. This quadrant also has 3 two-way toggles at the bottom of the base for added programmable functions. SATEC throttle retails for just under $60 and is worth its price to assure a flight simulator has throttle controls. As mentioned, a great design feature is if you purchase 2 of these quadrants, put them next to each other, move around those top knobs, you then have a multi-engine setup. If the Airbus side stick mentioned earlier seemed interesting, it's worth considering the Thrustmaster Quadrant Airbus Edition. This piece is an 8 to 10 ratio of the real thing and allows engine start controls in addition to a very realistic lever. What I really liked about this piece are the multiple detentes on it, identical to what is in an Airbus design. Those detentes, or natural resting points for the levers, are idle, climb, flex, and toga, or takeoff go around. It also utilizes mechanical levers that must be activated in order to move the levers to the thrust reverser position. It is a great piece that a lot of our customers really enjoy. Next, we have the Honeycomb Bravo throttle. We've offered this throttle for almost 8 months now, and we have yet to climb our way out of back orders. The location in Sporty's warehouse devoted to storing these has been collecting dust for the last 8 months because every time we get a shipment, they're moving right back out the door to waiting customers. The Bravo throttle has 6 levers, all of which can have their tension changed with the dial on the right side of the throttle. Each lever head is removable and can be configured for the multi-GA setting we see above. We can also do a single engine non-complex or a single engine complex setting. Now, Honeycomb realized that they didn't want a general aviation ceiling on the abilities of this throttle, so they included additional commercial levers covering 2 or 4 engine settings, a speed brake lever, and a flaps lever. That alone is impressive, but they also threw a gear lever with 3 light position indicators along with a trim wheel. They also made sure to include 7 two-way switches, an annunciator panel you can see towards the bottom of the image on the left, and at the top of that image we can slightly make out the autopilot buttons that is also included in the Honeycomb Bravo. We have a detailed review of the Bravo on our YouTube page, and if you'd like to see it in action, we ask that you visit our channel. The Honeycomb Bravo is a great throttle option for simulators, and if you're able to get your hands on one, I think you're going to agree. Towards the higher price point of the throttle quadrant spectrum, we have the Redbird Flight Simulator single throttle in both vernier and lever styles. Just as with the Redbird yoke, these throttle systems are made to last and durably constructed. The vernier style with push-pull knobs for throttle, prop, and mixture will provide the closest feel towards operating a 172 that you can find. The addition of a landing gear and flaps lever completes the package. If you prefer the systems of, say, an Archer or a Bonanza, then the lever style is ideal. Both single throttle options retail for $569, but if you like the unparalleled construction of the Redbird throttles, but don't want to spend that price or multiples and you'd like to work on a multi-engine system, then the twin throttle from Redbird is what you're looking for. This quadrant includes dual throttle, prop, and mixture controls in addition to the pre-mentioned flaps and landing gear lever. One final add-on complementing this design is the rudder trim button, and if you're committed to multi-engine simulation, then the $600 Redbird Flight Simulator twin throttle is strongly worth considering. As I mentioned earlier, rudder pedals are the most overlooked addition when it comes to constructing a flight simulator, but they are required to complete the system. They'll undoubtedly reduce stress when it comes to holding centerline on a taxiway or practicing 0-0 takeoffs. I'd categorize them as a required feature to keep muscle memory and flight control flows as realistic as possible, in addition to coordinated flight. The SATEC rudder pedals offer fluid motion and differential braking along with a tension dial and customizable footwells for a more realistic feel. The Thrustmaster flight rudder pedals are another set worth considering. They have a realistic sliding motion similar to the Cessna 172 I'm used to, and they incorporate, as mentioned earlier, that magnetic internal technology designed to reduce wear and tear. These rudder pedals are also compatible with Xbox, and the only pair of pedals I believe that will work with the Xbox platform. The TPR pedals are our highest rated pedals, and even though they're expensive, customers are very happy with their purchase when they get these. They come in at 15 pounds, and it's due to the robust design and feature set of these pedals. These pedals are designed after the pedals you would find on a Boeing aircraft, and they give you the ability to customize the distance of travel for each pedal, as well as footwell angles, so you can make sure it's comfortable to your flying. Lastly, the Redbird rudder pedals utilize a spring system, meaning you can apply real rudder pressure rather than only rudder travel, just as you would when flying real aircraft. The all-metal Redbird pedals use the same technology found in Redbird's family of simulator hardware, so they're not only realistic, they are virtually indestructible. Redbird pedals retail for $599. Flight deck complements are hardware options that I wouldn't necessarily recommend for beginners. These are options to upgrade a familiar system to being one step closer to a real flight deck, or for someone who looks forward to the bells and whistles of a simulator rather than just the foundation. With that being said, they can greatly improve the experience of using a simulator and offer additional layers to emergency training in addition to all phases of flight. Here we have the ProFlight radio panel offering COM 1 and 2, NAV 1 and 2, DME, ADF, and transponder functions. Also the ProFlight switch panel offering a landing gear lever with position lights, magneto switch, battery, alternator lights, and 11 other switches to denote to aircraft functions. Radio panel retails for about $150, and the switch panel is a hair under $100. ProFlight rounds out the stacks with the multi-panel offering a full autopilot, auto throttle switch, flap handle, and an elevator trim wheel. The ProFlight multi-panel comes in at $149.99, and with all three ProFlight options in congruence, you can have a pretty potent control stack for under $400. Now, let's say you want to take advantage of the sound effects of flight simulators or work on your communication skills, then the Air Force branded flight simulator headset is a great option. At the request of our customer service, I would like to mention that this headset does not, and I repeat, does not work in a real life airplane. I mention that because we've had more than one customer with that question. For organizational improvements, we like to recommend the Flight Simulator Flight Deck Stand. This is a great piece to assist in arranging all of your flight simulator hardware, and with the centered base platform and secondary levels on the left and right of the stand, in addition to an angled footwell for rudder pedals, this is a great way to up the design of your flight simulator setup. The Flight Velocity Trim Wheel Pro is a great enhancement to a flight simulator in that it continues the step towards realism for a trainer, but also allows the precise changes to a flight profile that is required in certain aircraft. The Pro version is an improvement on the previous model by adding the knob we see on the top right. That knob allows us to instantaneously change the amount of input our trim wheel conveys to the simulator, even while we're flying. So let's say you're in a digital Cessna 172 and the trim profile isn't changing at a realistic rate because a few minutes ago you were in a 747. You can slowly rotate that knob to increase or decrease wheel sensitivity and therefore increase the wheel's accuracy. It's a great piece to make sure we sim like we fly. Lastly, for flight deck complements, we'll cover a great learning tool, the GNS 430 and GNS 530 from Real Sim Gear. These simulator avionics are designed to work in tandem with your chosen airplane in the simulator to allow ease of control when it comes to the GPS in your digital aircraft. When I was training in flight school, I remember scouring the web for ways to learn how the Garmin 430 worked that I flew with in our 172 here. There were manuals I could read, but what each button does, but I wanted to see a moving map, or I wanted to see the change in those knobs as I turned them while we were flying an approach or while we were leaving airspace. So these really give you that option, and I think are a valuable training tool. With a little bit of syncing up, they will work smoothly with today's popular simulation software and improve on the efficacy of an at-home trainer. Lastly, for anyone who has tried to pan down during a simulated flight and rotate the ever-changing location of those little knobs in a cockpit, it's next to impossible. So having a tangible item that you can use while digitally flying is extremely helpful. Real Sim Gear also offers other avionics options, the G1000, the 750, so you'd be hard tested not to find what's in your airplane. An interesting new approach to flight simulation is Sim Your Plane. Just as we've been discussing, maybe jumping into a digital airplane that's like your airplane in real life, here's how you can make your real life airplane into the hardware for your flight simulator. So what you're going to need in this scenario is a PC or laptop to run a program, VR goggles, and then last but not least, an actual airplane. On the left screen, we'll see 3 orange sensors, and at the top of that, you'll see a little metal piece sticking out of that box, and that is a tension cord. So let's say you Velcroed that piece to your yoke, and then as you pull back on your yoke, it picks up the amount of change. You can then program that into your simulator as your elevator controller pitch. We do the same thing for rolling the yoke left and right. Okay, those are your ailerons. We can then take it and apply it to our rudder pedals. And keep in mind, this is all while we're on the ground. But once we've got our yoke configured and our rudder pedals, you can turn on your flight simulator on your PC, have it sync up with your headset, and then as you push forward on your yoke, you will see the digital airplane do the same thing. So this is a way to negate all the hardware I've just covered and use your own actual airplane as your flight simulator hardware. I know this is a very niche product, but it is something very interesting. And if you do find yourself with an aircraft on those bad days and you want to do some simming, this could be an option for you. Here we have a teaser of a couple flight sim hardware pieces yet to be released. If you attended AirVenture this year and swung by the EAA tent, you may have had a chance to check out the Honeycomb Charlie rudder pedals and fly a digital approach into Whitman Regional with these. I was lucky enough to test them out with the Honeycomb rep, and I personally liked the amount of tension each pedal requires to move, and they seem to have changes in tension as you move further away from the resting point. I'm sure that Honeycomb will bring the same standard of quality to these pieces, and when they are available, which I predict will be early next year, I'm looking forward to setting up a pair of Sporty's flight simulator department and flying with them a lot. A new entry to the flight simulation community from a very popular brand is the Velocity One flight control system from Turtle Beach. I have yet to get my hands on one of these, but at first glance, it looks like the Swiss Army knife of flight simulation hardware. It has full 180 degrees rotation of the yoke, or 90 degrees left and right of natural resting point, an integrated screen allowing flight characteristic edits while on the fly, somewhat similar to the Trim Wheel Pro where you could make those immediate changes. This gives you the same option. On the back side of the yoke, there are arms, there are bumper pedals that can serve as rudder control. In the throttle realm, there's the option for vernier style with the push-pull throttle, prop, and mixture, or you have 4 levers to simulate engine management. The above configuration is for a 4-engine commercial airliner, but those lever heads are interchangeable and could be reconfigured for general aviation, very similar to the Logitech throttles. In between the throttle assembly and the yoke housing, there is a trim wheel, and a very exciting feature that's not glaringly obvious is that this piece works with both personal computers and the Xbox platforms. I believe this will be the first yoke available to work on the Xbox platform, and for $350, I believe it's going to be very, very popular. Turtle Beach has not announced a release date yet, but my fingers are crossed for this year. Okay, so we've successfully combed through our options for building a flight simulator piece by piece, but what if we want to order an entire package and have everything we need with one transaction? Well, we have that option also. In addition to offering professional grade individual pieces, Redbird offers multiple flight simulator kits ranging from the entry-level needs up to a basic aviation training devices, which are eligible for logging recency, and we'll get more into that in just a few slides. We're going to start at the beginning with the Redbird Alloy Flight Simulator Complete Kit, including the previously mentioned yoke, rudder, and push-pull throttle quadrant. A computer and software will be required to complete this setup, but once you have those two taken care of, you're ready to go fly. The Redbird J is the next step in Redbird flight simulators, and this option includes a computer, a screen, and pre-installed prepared flight sim software. All that's required is a desk to hold the components, an electrical input, and a high-speed internet. Two great pieces from Redbird. The Redbird J Velocity builds on the Redbird J model by adding highly robust internal components in addition to upgraded computing power for high reliability. The Velocity is designed for demanding environments such as museums or public access kiosks, so the reinforced internals and increased computing power does go a very long way. The Redbird TD flight simulator is in a league of its own. The TD includes one cockpit configuration, either steam or glass panel at the customer choice, a computer, instrument panel, switch panel, monitor, keyboard, and speakers. The TD will fit perfectly in a small flight school when recreating lessons or cleaning up a debrief. It's also a great option for at-home use to keep skills and flows fluid. The J Velocity retails for just under $4,000 and the TD goes for $6,995. Next, we come to the Redbird TD2 flight simulator. The TD2 carries everything the TD offers, in addition to the option to fly with or without retractable landing gear, a constant speed propeller, and a high performance engine. The TD2 offers a steam gauge configuration paired with a Garmin 530 style GPS and a CAP 140 style autopilot, or you can get a glass configuration in a G1000 layout with the GFC 700 style autopilot. Top of the line TD2 is out the door for $7,995. Now, one of the most common questions I'm asked when talking about simulators are, how do I log my training or stay current? And during the summer of 2018, the FAA announced some changes aimed towards making it easier for pilots to keep their instrument currency using an aviation training device, or ATD for short. And when a Redbird TD or TD2 is paired with rudder pedals, it qualifies as an ATD. FAR 61.51 was amended to remove any reference to a flight instructor so pilots can fly instrument flights at home without scheduling an instructor. FAR 61.51 reads, a person may use time in a full flight simulator, flight training device, or aviation training device for satisfying instrument currency experience requirements provided a logbook or training record is maintained to specify the training device, time, and the content. In addition, FAR 6157 was also amended to allow flight simulator, flight training device, or aviation training device to be used for maintaining instrument experience, which covers the familiar 6 approaches. FAR 6157 reads, provided the device represents the category of aircraft for the instrument rating privileges to be maintained, and the pilot performs the tasks and iterations in simulated instrument conditions, a person may complete the instrument experience in any combination of an aircraft, full flight simulator, flight training device, or aviation training device. So long story short, if we have a basic aircraft training device, either the TD or the TD2, and we pair it with rudder pedals, we are able to log instrument experience for instrument training or currency without an instructor. So this is a great way to stay instrument current when those seasonal months preclude us from getting in the air. So let's transition into the final leg of our at-home flight simulator stool with software. This may be the most important part of the 3 needed pieces. In review, those are a computer, hardware, and software. The software is what projects our digital experience on the monitor of our PC or onto television and provides that real-time feedback. If you took Redbird hardware and plugged it into the supercomputer at MIT, you wouldn't be able to do anything without having a software package to analyze and provide borderline instantaneous results for each of our inputs to the system. Just like every physical flight should have a mission, so be it grabbing coffee before work, getting lunch with coworkers, or traveling long distances to make meetings, we know where we want to go in the airplane before we get in. And software should be approached the same way, with a personal question of how do we want to use it? Think of software as the brain of our system. So first up, we have X-Plane 11. Overall, this is a great program and one we've carried in our store for years. A couple pros: there's a free X-Plane 11 demo online, so you're able to test it out and see how the program operates with your computer system before you spend any money on it. Another pro is X-Plane 11 supports ForeFlight without an add-on or digital hoops to jump through. If you're on the same Wi-Fi and edit a couple simple settings, your aircraft's location and performance in the simulator will be reflected on the ForeFlight app. This feature alone makes it a strong contender for anyone interested in flight simulation. Another selling point for X-Plane is their third-party network is very expansive. A lot of pilots will say, I want this exact airplane with this avionics set. How do I digitally get it? And X-Plane is usually the system to offer these distinct airplanes. The vendors have almost 5 years to design aircraft, airports, or weather programs to complement this seasoned product, and some other simulators don't offer that ability. Another large pro is that X-Plane 11 will work with a Macintosh computer and is one of the few systems that does. Lastly, X-Plane also has a mobile application, but I wouldn't necessarily qualify it as a training method. Next up, we have Prepared version 5, which was released in April of last year, and it's a more structured and mission-driven program. Sure, you can buy the basic version and fly around your home airport, but the program was designed with training in mind. Developer Lockheed Martin describes its platform as a proven simulation framework application that immerses the user in a rich and interactive environment. The software is well supported and fans are very local with their praise. Cons are it's a little difficult to purchase with packages ranging from an academic license for $60, ranging all the way up to $2,500 for the Professional Plus license. I highly recommend researching all the available packages and understanding the different levels of performance if you are interested in Prepared. Prepared is not compatible with Macintosh operating systems, and it's the most expensive program, but for someone who is committed to learning from a simulator, it's a serious contender and a very detailed and objective-driven flight simulation program. Last Wednesday marked the first birthday of the Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 program going live on the consumer market, and the interest has been overwhelming. In that half year, there have been billions of hours logged on this program, and it seems every day that new customers are committing. You may notice that it's a little difficult to find certain flight simulator yokes along with other hardware components online these days, and I attribute much of that reason to this program in front of us. MSFS 2020 runs on PC, and as of the end of July, it's made the migration to the Xbox X and the Xbox S, as in Sierra, platforms. Now you can enjoy using this program in the convenience of your living room with the Xbox plugged into your television. This is a great program to pre-fly a trip you have coming up or go kill some time sightseeing. But the flight dynamics leave room for want, and I believe it will be another few months before the aerodynamics match the previous two software programs. Infinite Flight is a mobile-only platform you can download from the App Store or Google Play. This program will only run on phones or tablets and is an extremely valuable training tool, in addition towards enjoyable simulated flight. My biggest takeaway from the hours I've spent using the Infinite Flight app is the ability to link with ForeFlight and better understand the abilities of my EFB. Infinite Flight won't be able to strengthen my ability to flare the airplane in a strong crosswind, but it will allow me to practice the preparation phase of flight planning, climb and descent profiles, and airspace navigation. As weather abilities are updated in the program, understanding the IFR system and flying simulated flights down to minimums will be an extremely helpful tool to strengthening flows and workload practice. In July of 2018, the Experimental Aviation Association, or EAA for short, released a virtual flight academy aimed towards virtual instruction. It's a two-stage program with discounted prices for EAA members. Stage 1 focuses on pre-solo content, and Stage 2 covers crosswind operations, emergencies, and other testing materials. You will need a computer, hardware, and a license to Flight Simulator X Steam Edition. If you've met the requirements, this is a nice program to test attention to detail in critical phases of flight and to prioritize your focus. Okay, so now that we've spent ample time on what is required for a flight simulator, as previously mentioned, it's important to decide if we'd like to use it as a tool or a toy. Having the answer to that question will help with budgeting while also understanding how we'll use it to keep us fluent in aviation. There are 4 categories we're going to discuss when it comes to scenarios for a simulator. Number 1 is going to be fun flying or using this as a toy, followed by VFR maneuvers. Third, we have IFR maneuvers, and lastly, we have emergencies. So let's jump on into fun flying. A simulator offers the joy of partaking in a flight that we otherwise wouldn't have the logistical, financial, or maybe legal ability to fly. The simulator opens that door to us. First mission I'm going to throw out is Lindbergh's transatlantic flight. Now, I would recommend a faster airplane, so that doesn't take you 33.5 hours. But if you want to designate a weekend to it, so be it. Previous updates to Microsoft Flight Simulator have greatly improved the detail of the US and the UK. So outside of the 32 hours over the ocean, you'll have some really nice views. With those previously mentioned updates, you can find yourself spending hours exploring coastlines or cities. Be sure to enjoy the coastline of Europe. And I can assure you, with my last name, you better believe I've logged a few flights exploring Ireland. We can go follow in Cal Rogers' footsteps by retracing the 4,000-mile transcontinental flight. As you can tell from the picture above, this milestone was made in the early days of aviation, 1911 to be exact, but he's solidified his spot in aviation history. Now, sadly, Cal Rogers passed away the year after his accomplishment, but a quick Google of the flight legs he flew over 100 years ago and a retracement of those steps is a nice tribute to his adventurous nature. We're going to continue with aviation history and say it should be required in order to consider yourself an aviator to have landed at Devil Hills Kitty Hawk in North Carolina. This is where the Wright brothers chiseled their way into worldly history. Add a little bit of time to your flight and approach from the south to enjoy the Outer Banks. Along with the European coastline themed flight, you can head about 1,200 nautical miles south and enjoy flying the beautiful African countryside from a low altitude. The Microsoft Flight Simulator program actually allows you to turn on fauna in the points of interest filter within the flight planning feature, and it will actually populate where you can find digital live animals. The last fun flying scenario would be to go explore Mount Everest in the 29th flight level. If you plug in airport VNTH and fly due north, you're going to see the highest point in the world in no time. Now, as we transition away from the fun flying or joyriding, if you will, and more towards using the package as a tool, it's important to stress that you should fly the simulator the same way you would fly the actual airplane. If you're serious about using the simulator as a tool to stay current or fluid in procedures of flying an airplane, then don't cut corners. Begin the session on the ramp with engines off. Run your checklist and start the engine. Go ahead and test your brakes. Perform a run-up before taking off. Talk on the radio. Tune your altimeter. The more that we add to our simulated flying world, that brings us closer to real-life tendencies, the more effective this system will be at keeping you sharp. And number 2, no matter how much money you throw into a simulator, you will not attain real-world quality flying. It's plain and simple. You'll never fly by the seat of your pants in a simulator. You will never smell a change in the cabin, signifying an engine issue. You won't understand the appreciation for going full power and feeling cold airflow on your face during these dog days of August. We must approach the simulator as a way to strengthen a muscle, but not to learn and exercise. And with that being said, a simulator can be a great tool towards staying proficient and up to date on current systems. Just as I recommended preparing for takeoffs as you would in the plane with a run-up and pilot briefing, I also recommend clearing turns before practicing maneuvers. I know this seems trivial, but to stay true to realism and as a muscle memory warm-up towards the real thing, I do advise it. When it comes to maneuvers, I like to mention a few that would make you sweat a little bit if it was real life. With the simulator, we have the ability to practice/simulate the more demanding maneuvers in a safe environment so that we can focus on critiquing and improving those tasks without the tandem real-life necessity of keeping an airplane airborne. Power on stalls. These used to guarantee I would have a sweaty shirt during our debrief, but eventually they did become fun for me. With a simulator teetering on the edge of a stall, don't be afraid to see what happens when you kick the rudder full deflection in a power on stall, but only start tweaking the maneuver once you've mastered it. Crosswind approach and landing. This can be a great maneuver aimed towards input versus reaction and really seeing what some strong crosswinds can do. Take the wind up to your plane's maximum tested level and see just how hard it is to land the airplane in those conditions. Then take it up another 10 knots and better understand why those limitations exist. 8s on pylons were my second favorite maneuver during my training. Number 1 is actually on the next slide. I personally enjoyed 8s on pylons because they were real world applicable back in World War I. As it was explained to me by my instructor, the 8s on pylons maneuver was intended to keep our target point at the end of our wing as close to stationary as possible. This would allow the gunner to have an almost motionless target and increase their hit percentage. This was driven into my memory when that same instructor started making a do 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 noise while I'd fly them. But the lesson was forever ingrained in my mind, and I've always smirked a little bit when flying them in a physical or a digital airplane. VFR into IMC. This maneuver is meant to give the VFR pilot a taste of what instrument flying is like, while conveying the need for diligence to remove themselves from the situation. It's a good maneuver to practice in a simulator by flying into a wall of overcast clouds and slowly flying a 180-degree turn while staying within 100 feet of your cruising altitude and keeping airspeed in check. It's not a bad maneuver to practice a few times in case you ever experience this in real life. Mountain flying with a required chandelle. The chandelle, which means candle in French, is believed to have originated in dogfighting and allowed the pilot to reverse direction in minimum radius climbing turn. This was actually my favorite maneuver throughout my training, and my request to fly one on my check ride took the examiner by a little bit of surprise. Although a 172 has yet to log a dogfight, you can apply this maneuver to mountain flying. Let's say you find yourself in a crevice and realize the walls are closing in around you. This is the advised maneuver to turn back the way you came in the smallest lateral footprint. Try simulating one in the Smoky Mountains and see how your plane reacts. Next, we have takeoff and landing at a very high density altitude airport. Once you've become accustomed to the takeoff roll in your simulated 172 or airplane of your choice at a home airport in normal conditions, go take off from an airport with a high elevation, or find one around 3000 MSL and crank the outside air temperature to 100 degrees, bring the baro pressure down to 29.5. This will greatly reduce the performance of the engine and in turn lengthen your takeoff roll. This is really eye-opening the first time you simulate this scenario with full tanks. Next, let's go ahead and increase the challenge with some IFR maneuvers. First maneuver is that one you're going to know is required as you drive into the airport on those scuzzy mornings where you can't turn your lights on without blinding yourself. I've never flown an actual 0-0 takeoff, but I simulated over a dozen while training, and I've flown about just as many in the simulator. This is a great challenge for rudder control on takeoff and also tracking desired heading once you've left the ground. Intercepting and tracking VOR radials is a maneuver aimed towards precision in navigating, which is a requisite when flying IFR. A simulator is a great way to quickly test the sensitivity of intersecting a radial 30 miles out from the source versus 5 miles out. Holding procedures and entry can be a very intimidating portion of IFR flight, but through repetition and some mental math, they become secondhand. Try flying holds off a created waypoint and then upgrade to flying holding procedures off of missed approaches. For extra credit, try flying a timed hold rather than a distance-based hold. The DME arc is a rare maneuver, but still a challenging one, and once completely understood, allows for better navigational abilities. GPS fails in flight, but the airport has a VOR. You can go ahead and fly a DME arc at a safe altitude until heading is within 5 degrees perpendicular to the runway heading radial, then turn inbound, and you should be on a long final. ILS down to minimums is the IFR maneuver I try and fly once a week. If I ever find myself in a scenario where I need to land at an airport with weather just above minimums, I want to have this procedure down pat. For an added challenge, I'll sometimes throw a crosswind in once 3 miles out to keep my scan inside the plane from getting fixated, while also searching for those lights outside the plane. The circling approach procedure is one of the least used approaches in the world of localizer and RNAV approaches, but still, it is a useful scenario to practice. Just as I mentioned clearing turns before each VFR maneuver, the same level of commitment to flows should be dedicated to the instrument approaches. Make sure to run an approach briefing before every instrument approach and solidify those flows. It's extremely tempting to jump in an aircraft, tune a local ILS, and just fly around until you intercept it. But to again use our simulator as a tool, we must factor in the real world procedures to make sure we don't pick up detrimental tendencies. I use the ASAP ICE ATM acronym during my briefings in the physical airplane, in addition to the digital version. And I'm sure I look very weird at my desk stating the different altitude restrictions for each phase of an approach, but it is required to gain fluidity from a simulator. Now, I'd like to pause a second and explain the different approach I take when it comes to training for emergencies. All of the maneuvers we've covered thus far are tasks we can look forward to flying in the airplane or in the digital world. When it comes to emergencies, we train for these so that if we ever experience one, we're aptly prepared for it. If you are a pilot and wanting to use a simulator to strengthen emergency flows, I can't stress enough the value of chair flying and learning the concrete flows before jumping into a digital simulator. Once you know all the required steps to attempt to restart and then secure the engine, if you ever see this sight picture, then you're prepared to simulate the emergency and see how different inputs yield different results in those critical phases of flight. Alrighty, so now that the disclaimer is out of the way, let's discuss a few of my favorite emergencies to simulate. The emergency approach and landing is the most probable emergency we will see as aviators. Whether from fuel starvation or engine failure, it's good to know the best glide of your airplane and find out the range and approach that works for your bird. Just as we can practice an emergency approach and landing in real training, we should save the engine failure during climb out maneuver for the simulator. What to do in this scenario should be covered in every departure briefing, but here we are actually able to test what would happen to the airplane and what our sight picture would be. Try neutralizing the engine at 200 feet AGL, then go for 400, then 600, then try 800. Try killing the engine at pattern altitude and see if you have the maneuverability to make that 180-degree turn back to the runway. Now run the same cycle and throw a 12-knot direct crosswind into the mix. This is a valuable maneuver to practice in our simulator. The electrical failure at night is an extreme nuisance, and they test our ability to aviate, navigate, and communicate. Simulate shutting off the electrical system over a busy area like Manhattan, then try the same emergency over rural Oklahoma. Ground lighting will affect ability to fly the plane noticeably, and it's a better lesson to learn in a simulator than in the real world. Emergency descents are a very fun maneuver in real life and in the flight simulator. I can still remember my first emergency descent I flew with my instructor. They simulate if we have an emergency with a passenger and need to land at an airport beneath us while in cruise, and it's a great test of airspeed control and creates a sight picture that is very, very rare in flying. The power off 360 accuracy approach is a great test of control of the plane and analyzing all your numbers to make sure you can make the landing where you would like to. This maneuver is taught in the commercial phase of training, and its execution requires great control of the plane and energy management. IFR flight with pitot blockage may be one of the most dangerous emergencies in my eyes. When you lose an engine, whether in VFR or IFR, you know it from the loss of noise. When the electrical system goes out, it's glaringly obvious. But when the pitot port is blocked, it's difficult to diagnose because you have other instruments providing information that can counter what the airspeed indicator is telling you. I've personally spoken to a few pilots who have experienced this condition, and while they were appreciative of their training, they are glad that the numbers say they'll never experience that again. So now that we've covered emergencies, let's discuss one of the main reasons people buy a flight simulator, and that is because of the new program, Microsoft Flight Simulator. The program debuted just over 12 months ago last Wednesday, and in that short time span, there have been hundreds of millions of digital flying hours logged by international users. There's over 2 terabytes of data invested into making sure planet Earth looks and responds. Think reflections on water or surface wind patterns to make this a serious simulator rather than a game. When the program hit the market, I think it was okay to call it a game. The aerodynamics, as I mentioned, were lacking, and it seemed like there were a lot of subtle bugs. Avionics not turning on, high frequency of program crashes, features like live weather getting a little squirrely. But that being said, they've been burning the midnight oil updating this program and all its features, and it truly is a different product than when it went live last August. I'm going to quickly cover some of the details I like about the Microsoft program versus its competitors. First up is flight planning. Microsoft Flight Sim took heed from the superb flight planning applications and programs that are currently in general aviation and used and partnered with NavBlue to incorporate navigation data pertinent to flight. The data is updated every 28 days and creates a helpful launch page from which to give your flight a beginning, middle, and end. Let's say we want to fly from Los Angeles International Airport to Santa Barbara Municipal in a Cessna 172. From the World Maps page, we select a 172 on the top left of the page, type KLAX in departure airport and KSBA in arrival airport. The default setting is GPS direct, and we're also provided distance and time to complete computed off the aircraft we have selected. Other route options are via VOR. We also have low altitude IFR airways and high altitude airways. We also have the ability to add an airport or waypoint to our route to simulate real world application. You'll see a Navlog tab towards the top right of the screen, and this is where we can plan out the vertical profile of our flight rather than the lateral. Our waypoints are organized with heading, distance, and altitude. We have the ability to set our cruising altitudes, as you can see on the upper right area, desired frequency, predicted speed, and time until next waypoint. One thing that I hope is included in future updates is the ability to choose a departure, arrival, or approach procedure for our flight, but we'll see if that becomes a feature. This is an immensely helpful page for flight planning as a student, and it looks eerily similar to my VFR flight plans from those early days. Next, we're going to cover the weight and balance calculation feature. For our familiar 172, I punched in some basic numbers, 50% fuel with 2 pilots, and our total to max takeoff weight is calculated at the very bottom. Our center of gravity is shown on the right with limits provided. Let's go ahead and fully fill the fuel tanks, exchange some weight between the 2 pilots, and go ahead and add a passenger. You'll see as our total to max takeoff weight ratio has drastically changed. We're at 96.6 of payload and our center of gravity has moved further aft. Let's again add another passenger. We're now visually alerted that we're over max payload and takeoff weight. But don't forget everyone's golf club and bags in the cargo hold. And now we are given visual clues on the right side of the screen that our CG is out of its limits. Although we can't edit the max numbers to reflect the plane we train in or one currently in our hangar, this is a helpful tool to understand that weight edits do and will also allow us to simulate what an FCG takeoff feels like. Now, I could easily fill an entire webinar discussing everything that is Microsoft Flight Sim 2020, but to stay on point, I'll conclude that it's a very powerful program that offers immense enjoyment in addition to the flight planning, weight, and balance or failure features. There's a lot to be said for joy flying, whether lassoing the Eiffel Tower in a Bonanza, exploring the Grand Canyon in a Savage Cub, getting an aerial view of the Hoover Dam in a DA-62, floating around the Sydney Opera House in the A5, practicing those steep turns in a Cessna 172. You can easily lose track of time with the simulator, of which I am continuously guilty of. Many pilots in Sporty's office grew up with earlier renditions of this program, and I like to think that this new version will charge a new batch of interested aviators who hopefully take that next step with an introductory flight, leading to a first solo and additional certifications and ratings to follow. Now, I may seem a little biased when it comes to the amount of time I've devoted towards covering the different software options, so I'm going to close out the software conversation with a quick analysis. The Microsoft program is a great way to enjoy the beautiful scenes outside of the airplane. You can practice dead reckoning or early navigational aid features, but some of the more precise physics are off. For that reason, I'll use the analogy that MSFS is a great beginner program and applicable to early VFR training. As a pilot progresses through their training, they start practicing performance maneuvers and a little bit of instrumentation work. For that type of training, I like to recommend X-Plane 11. Whenever I fire up a simulator, I like to apply an aerodynamics test in a Cessna 172 to see how the program handles the digital physics of flight. I take a Cessna 172 to 3,000 feet MSL, and I fly a steep turn to the commercial certificate standards. I'm familiar with how much rudder, RPM increase, and amount of back pressure will be required to keep a 50-degree bank angle while holding altitude at maneuvering speed, because I've flown this maneuver many times myself. X-Plane provides a very realistic simulation of this maneuver, which I believe speaks to the entirety of its programming and therefore is a great simulator to strengthen maneuvers and flows at a fraction of the real-world flying price. Now, as an aviator continues progressing and gets closer to the commercial certificate, they'll start considering the more macro features of an aviation career. Maybe focus on what it's like to fly freight and heavies, fly up in the Alaska bush, delivering medical supplies, or even search and rescue. And for that reason, I come back to Prepared with its structured layout of objectives and detailed briefings towards a clear mission goal. It's a great trainer and one that our military, in addition to the basic aviation training devices available from Redbird, decided to use as their programs. Finally, let's cover a couple quick flight simulator complements that will fall into the software category but aren't required for a flight simulator. We'll start with VATSIM, which stands for Virtual Air Traffic Simulation Network. This is a network you can join with your flight simulator and fly around the world with other sim enthusiasts communicating with live air traffic controllers, tower operators, and other airplanes. Every plane you see in that screenshot above is a simmer flying around the continental US. It is a great way to keep radio skills proficient and yield the most from your flight sim experience. The platform is completely free and boasts over 79,000 members. Pilot Edge is somewhat similar to VATSIM in network design, but the main difference is that the sim controllers are real-world air traffic controllers. So this brings a high level of professionalism and realism to Pilot Edge. Therefore, subscriptions start at $19.95 monthly, but allow savings through annual subscription. Having personally been a student who was intimidated with early controlled airspace communication, this would have been a great tool to get over my worries early on. Both are valuable training tools for an extremely important and perishable skill required in our airplane. ForeFlight is a phenomenal system to pair with any flight simulator. The ability to track a flight's location, performance, and even add AHRS is great. I rarely simulate flights anymore without running ForeFlight in tandem. And their track log feature allows analysis of the flight, which is beneficial to clean up problematic areas and improvability in the airplane. It's an ideal way to review maneuvers and emergency performance. On the left screen, you can see a little bit before the 9 a.m. mark, I simulated an engine out scenario about 7 miles from Wilmington at 3,500 MSL. I made it easy on myself by experiencing the engine failure while I was lined up with the runway. On the right, I departed Sporty's and flew over to Lunkin for the 2-1 left ILS approach. To stay true to training, you can see the outbound leg and the lasso towards the top of the picture, indicating the outbound and inbound intercept. My airspeed and altitude were a little shaky early on, but I feel confident I made up for it when I pegged that glide slope towards the end. Now, this was also a scenario where I edited the overcast clouds to break when I was about 150 feet above minimums. I'm constantly testing out new features on ForeFlight with the Infinite Flight app I have on my phone, looking to better understand the latest ForeFlight features, say 3D traffic or the visual icing layers. I can run a simulated flight on my phone and experience those new features while typing an email. I highly recommend ForeFlight as an add-on to your simulator, and as updates continue, the features will continue to increase the benefits for the sim community as well as for pilots. And in closing, I like to put the homework to everyone who's considering a flight simulator to ask themselves the two following questions when it comes to a future simulator. First question, am I going to use this as a toy for a fun pastime or a way to fill the weekend stuck inside? Or am I going to use it as a tool to strengthen my abilities? Will I turn it on and go buzz the towers in Chicago in an extra 330? Or will I have a mission for each cycle I fly to keep the rust from accruing? The second question to ask yourself is, how much can I spend on this simulator? Usually this number is very dependent on your answer to that first question, but if you're serious about flying, really consider the quality of the machine you want to help with your flying, and if used correctly, it will save you money, training, and headache down the road. Majority of the products we covered today are available at sportyspilotshop.com. On the horizontal black bar, you will see a tab for flight simulators. Highlighting that tab will categorize all flight simulator products available in addition to flight simulator blogs on the left-hand pane. A significant number of the digital images I use today for maneuvers and emergencies are from our Learn to Fly course. And if you're looking to learn why a plane reacts the way it does, review maneuvers, or study for a written test, I recommend browsing that product. If you'd like additional advice or assistance in planning out a flight simulator, please send me an email at flightsim@sportys.com or call our customer service at the number listed. Lastly, you can expect a follow-up email tomorrow thanking you for your attendance. We'll include a link to the recording of today's video in addition to some of the products we've covered, and also a link to our new Flight Simulator central page, which is a great starting point for any and all flight simulator questions. And that concludes my presentation. I want to thank everyone for their time. And John, we may have a question or two.
Yeah, we got a number of questions that came in as you're going, but Chris, you mowed through a ton of information, so you answered some of them as you went, which is great. I'll throw out a couple that came in. One is as relates to manuals and especially Flight Sim 2020. There isn't really an owner's manual, so where can I go to learn more about it or kind of get off the ground running or get some tips? What are some resources out there?
Sure, and I have found that Microsoft offers quite a few forum pages on their website. I've scoured through a lot of those, but you'll also find that on some of the other non-Microsoft focused forums, a lot of customers are collaborating and working with themselves to help each other out when it comes to problems. One of the largest issues will be I want to start Microsoft Flight Simulator up and all of a sudden there are bugs. I have found that majority of the times that'll happen, or I know it happens to someone, they're able to find that answer on those forums. So that would be my first recommendation.
Okay, great. And how about this is a quick one, but I thought it worth pointing out. How about helicopters? We went through a lot of controls. Is there really anything out there that's any good for simulating helicopter flight?
It's tough because of the population who fly helicopters. There are a lot of pilots, therefore there's a lot of need for a yoke, like a 172 yoke, but there's very few for helicopter digital pilots. Now, I can't say that there aren't any, but because there are few and far in between, they're out there, but they are expensive. You can find pieces approaching $1,000, which will have your cyclic and a couple of the other things required. It's going to take a little bit of research, but they are out there.
And how about when it comes to ForeFlight, and particularly with Xbox? Xbox, as you mentioned, introduces sort of a different platform here. We're just getting figured out on PC, and then Xbox comes along, which is exciting, but obviously comes with some different limitations. Is there a way to do some of that ForeFlight integration and ForeFlight training with Flight Sim 2020 on the Xbox?
Because the Xbox platform and its programming has only been out for about a month now, I don't believe those third-party programmers have had the ability to go ahead and find a way for the two programs to speak to each other. But I can assure you that there is a large, and I read a lot of our Flight Sim emails, if not all of them, there is a very, very large interest in using Xbox for a simulator. So I can assure you that ForeFlight is aware of that, and they know that there's a real need to make sure that ForeFlight and Microsoft can talk to each other on the Xbox platform. And I wouldn't be surprised if maybe in the next 3 to 6 months there is an ability to do that.
I'll close with just maybe one more here, Chris. And the question was with respect to Redbird flight simulators, particularly the all-in-one systems like the J or the TD. Are you able to load different software or options there? Could I run X-Plane on my Redbird J?
So when it comes to putting different programs on the pre-programmed systems, the J Velocity, the TD, or the TD2, it is adamantly indicated from Redbird, please do not do that because you will interfere with the way the program is set up. Now, with the Redbird Alloy Kit, which is the main hardware pieces, you can go ahead and use whichever program you'd like and still have that valuable or value of hardware. But when it comes to, again, the J, Velocity, TD, or TD2, they prefer not to do it because one wrong switch or one wrong thing installed will mess up the system. And then also when you get to the TD or TD2, which are FAA certified for approaches or keeping proficiency, you would not be able to run another program because it has not been checked off by the FAA.
Great. I think we'll leave it there, Chris. Thanks for the presentation. Lots of great information. Again, a reminder, everyone, that sporties.com for all of this, all the products, and also some great tips. Chris has got a series of blog posts and videos there at sporties.com/blog. You can read for some great tips, and check our YouTube channel for a recording of this webinar in the next couple of days. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon on another Sporties webinar.